Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's your man, Sean Carter. And I want to talk to you all about what is probably the hottest topic at the moment, and that is inflation. Now, when it comes to inflation, a lot of people are giving a lot of different reasons as to why inflation is what it is. But the reason why we are here today is to discuss what everyone isn't saying about inflation. But first, the intro. When it comes to explaining why inflation has been what it has been, you're generally going to hear people refer to two different events to explain why. And the first event would be the quantitative easing program following the 2007-2008 financial crisis, or the housing crisis. So to explain quantitative easing to the layperson, or better yet, we're going to call it QE going forward. So what QE was, it was a program whereby the Federal Reserve pumped liquidity back into the economy following the 2007-2008 housing crisis, which for all intents and purposes was really a depression. If you want to be honest, it was a depression. So with liquidity pretty much drained from the system, the Federal Reserve pumped liquidity back into the economy by purchasing the bad debts or purchasing assets, mostly from financial institutions, among others. So what they did was, in exchange for those bad debts, those bad assets, they purchased those, which in turn capitalized the banks, and the banks were supposed to, of course, lend money back into the economy. So, and by the way, and when I say pump liquidity back into the economy, liquidity simply means creating money. That's all. And now, the second reason that you hear given for the rise in inflation is the stimulus program following the pandemic. Now, this one don't really need to be explained that much since, it's so recent, but I'll just go over it briefly. So the stimulus program, whereby people got their $1,400 checks, their enhanced unemployment, they got their PPP loans. And there was a few other things as well, but that's pretty much the gist of it. And I want to say it came out to, I forgot the exact figure, but it came out to a few $1 trillion. So those are the two explanations that you're going to hear given as to why inflation has risen the way it's risen. But what if I told you that's not the entire picture? What if I told you that? But hold on. Before we can get into the real reason for inflation, we have to go over the generally accepted explanation given for inflation. And generally, that would be the government created too much money. Or you hear the axiomatic statement of too many dollars chasing too few goods, which they really mean the same thing, but there's a slight difference. But let's go back to the former, which is the government created too much money. So when people say that, what they're simply saying is that because the government created too much money, and by the law of supply and demand, what that means is, as more money is created, then it stands to reason that the money that's currently in circulation is going to lose its value. And when the money in circulation loses its value, then of course you're going to pay more dollars for the same things. And when you're paying more dollars for the same things, it looks like prices are rising, but what's really happening is that you're paying more money, more dollars for the same things. And then on the other hand, which like I said is pretty similar, when they say too many dollars chasing too few goods. And what that simply means is that with there being a lot of dollars in circulation, so people are able to purchase more products, more goods, and so forth. So with more money in the economy, more money circulating, and since people are able to purchase more goods and stuff, what ends up happening is that the economy overheats because the available supply goes down. And because demand is still high, because there is so much money in circulation, then obviously prices are going to rise to meet that demand and dwindling supply. So if you let such individuals tell it, then they would have you believe that inflation is simply the government creating too much money. But again, that's perfectly logical. It makes sense and all of that. But what if I told you that's only half the story? And that's what we're going to get into. Now, before I delve deep into explaining the real reason for inflation, I want to explain clearly that what we see taking place right now is really the culmination of the inflation that we experienced back in the 1970s. Because contrary to popular belief, this is not the first time this has happened. Now, to be honest, I mean, we've broken records this go round, but this is not the first time that we've had this inflationary shock. But my main point is that what is going on right now is the culmination of 50 plus years of monetary policy. And that is what we're gonna get into now. When it comes to the real reason for inflation, one thing I want to make crystal clear is that it's not money creation by itself. What really matters, and what you're not going to hear in many mainstream economics, is that what really matters is where the money goes. That's what you don't hear. It is where the money goes that matters. See, here's the main point. When the government creates money and that money is given to the banks, then what the banks then turn around and do is they use that money mostly to finance speculation by lending it to investment banks and so forth. And that money goes into speculation. And by speculation, I mean companies buying back their own shares. I mean, just the stock market overall, the commodity markets, real estate, and so forth. So the money goes towards propping up asset prices instead of into what they call the real economy. And what is referred to as the real economy is the production of products, goods, and services. And to break down the implications for what I just explained, think of it like this. Now, if money goes into producing products, goods, and services, then inflation would actually remain steady, because in order to offset the additional money that's brought into circulation, you have additional products, goods, and services, right? So you have a steady supply in order to meet that increased money supply. But instead, when money goes into speculation, what then happens is that asset prices rise, but then you don't have the supply in order to offset that rising money supply. I mean, I know what I'm gonna say, man. I mean, I hate to say this, man, considering that this is a trading channel. But I mean, the truth though, right? That's why you're here. But what that really means is that when money goes into speculation, when the banks are mostly financing speculation instead of production, then what happens is that when real estate, commodities, and all of that stuff is speculated in, so the price of those things tend to go up. So if you wonder why, housing prices are what they are currently, food prices and all that stuff, I mean, that's pretty much why, is because for the past 50 plus years, that's been the monetary policy, has been to finance speculation instead of production. So you drive up the price of assets, but no money really goes into producing products, goods, and services. Now, I know it's a common thing for people to mostly blame the stimulus program for today's inflation, but that's just simply not true. As a matter of fact, what I want to do is, before we can even talk about the stimulus program, now, back in September of 2019, the Federal Reserve gave Wall Street a multi-trillion-dollar bailout. Now, this was actually kept a secret, but they gave Wall Street a multi-trillion-dollar bailout back in September of 2019. Now, quite obviously, this was before the pandemic was even a thing. But why haven't you heard about this? The reason why you haven't heard about this is because the media was told not to report on this for at least 2 years after the bailout was given. So it now being 2022, we're just now hearing about it, little more than 2 years later. That is why. And I'm gonna leave a link to the article down in the description box in case y'all wanna check it out for yourselves. So before we can even get to the whole stimulus thing, that bailout happened. And then another thing is that, speaking of the stimulus package, before the stimulus even happened, in 2020, like immediately following the stock market crash, what happened was that the Federal Reserve gave a $2.5 trillion bailout to the repo market, which is the debt market, which is the bigger market involved in Wall Street. So that also occurred. So these two extremely huge bailouts occurred before we even get to the stimulus program. But one thing I want to also bring attention to is, as I said earlier, even though there was a lot of money given in terms of bailouts and everything else, like I said, the money creation is only half of the equation. I'm pretty sure at this point somebody may be asking the question of, if an increase in the money supply causes prices to go up due to the dollar weakening, then why even increase the money supply? And that's actually a pretty good question. But the reason why the money supply has to increase is in order to keep pace with the population growth. So as more people are born, and so forth, the money supply has to grow in order to match that. Because if not, then we would actually be in a state of deflation. Now, remember when I said stick a pin in the quantitative easing program, or the QE program? There's a reason for that. Because when the QE program was implemented, its purpose was, as I previously stated, to pump liquidity back into the economy in order to stimulate consumerism and so on. Better yet, to stimulate economic activity. Now, all in all, what's going on right now has really been a long time in the making. As I pointed out earlier, what's taking place is really the result of 50 plus years of monetary policy aimed at financing speculation instead of production. But the reason why inflation rose as sharply as it did recently is because we had a direct hit to the supply chain. I'm talking about to the point where supply could not move as freely as it once did. So with the supply chain being in a stranglehold, and then plus, like I pointed out earlier, the exponential rise in the money supply. Now what that comes down to, what that really means is that demand is sky high, but supply, not so much. Now what you're gonna have when that kind of a thing goes on is, obviously, you're gonna have a sharp rise in prices in order to keep what little supply remains. And that's what's going on. Not just in food, but also in the housing market and everything else. And I also pointed out how those things have been speculated in for a very long time as well. To recap what's been said, first, it's not just money creation by itself that causes inflation. What really matters is where the money goes. And what the banks have chosen to do is finance speculation or propping up asset prices over financing the production of products, goods, and services. And secondly, what caused prices to rise is because we had a direct hit to the supply chain while the money supply remained high, which in turn means that demand remained high while the supply basically dwindled. I hope this video helped you all to understand the real reason for inflation. And I really and truly hope that I did not talk over anyone's head. So with that being said, I would like to thank you all for watching. I would like to ask you all also to like, share, and subscribe, and to stay tuned because I got a whole lot more coming. Again, thanks for watching.